Hi, thanks for watching. Going to make a few dozen Indian cricket fans that look at my video log a little bit upset today. A look at the India-England series. Starts in 2 weeks' time. As that comment suggests, I'm picking England. I'll say that at the start. I'm going to pick them 2-1 to win. We're going to have an extended chat about this series. It's a four-test series. To have a good look at it. It's one of the marquee series of the summer. This and probably the Australia-South Africa series, and probably to a lesser extent the Pakistan South Africa series, to see how they perform outside Asia as well. But let's get back to this. Now, I want to talk mainly at the start here about England's record in Asia, because I think that if this was played on a neutral field, I don't think that anyone doubts that England would win and win handsomely. Um, England, India's been atrocious outside of Asia. England has been not good in Asia. We're going to look at how not good, or how maybe some mitigating factors about their Asian performance. So I'm going to focus on those 5 tests against Pakistan, Sri Lanka they played there earlier this year. 4 losses and a win, not a good record, obviously. The losses were by 10 wickets in that first test in Dubai, and then 4 reasonable performances. I mean, yes, they lost 3 tests in a row after that: 72, 71, and 75 runs, tight games in Test cricket, and then an 8-wicket victory, a comprehensive victory in the final test in Sri Lanka. Um, let's go through what happened. Their play of pace is perfectly fine. England's always been a very strong player of pace. The team has been a strong player of pace. They lost 15 wickets to pace all tour. 15 for 645, 43 average, 3 wickets a match, incredibly low wickets per match number. Um, and I think an important little stat there is the economy rate. Now 3.27. The reason I say that is that England's biggest issues was scoring runs, was getting the run rate ticking over, and they just were absolutely mired in the mud against slow bowling. I remember in that second test in Pakistan, Cook and Trott actually put on 130, 140 run stand, but it was over 2 sessions essentially. And when you give bowlers like Abdul Rahman and especially Syed Ajmal, I mean, the wicket taking ball is in there somewhere, and you need to catch him when you're set. And they never really look comfortable at all. But they did against the pace bowling. So anytime pace bowling comes on in this series, it's likely that England will be able to release the pressure and score some runs. Um, England's pace bowling on that point is it's Asia proof, if you like. A lot of the time you look at these pace bowling teams like England, and they go to Asia and it falls apart. That's not the case here. I mean, Anderson, 3.6 wickets a match on tour at 24.72, Broad 3.8 wickets a match at 24.67, numbers more or less in line with their performances the last 3 years or so. Wickets for matches are a bit lower, but bear in mind England were playing 2 slow bowlers for much of this series, or those series, and the overs just weren't there. So they're very good numbers for Asian pace bowlers, exceptionally good, I would suggest actually. Um, England's slow bowling stocks, they're as good as they've been in 50 or 60 years, since the days of Tony Locke and Jim Laker. Panesar, rediscovered Monty Panesar, 5.3 wickets a match at 25.19, superb numbers against the Pakistanis. He'll play a role in this series. He'll probably play, I suspect, probably all 4 tests, to be honest with you. Um, Graham Swan, 5.8 wickets a match at 23.48. Again, very strong. We talk about Swan possibly regressing in the last few years, but not in Asia. Performed very, very well against Sangakkara, Yunus Khan, Jayawadena. 3 players that are better probably than anyone they're going to see in this India series. We'll talk about India's batting in a moment. They might sound like sacrilege with Tendulkar, but again, we'll get to that in a second. The issue obviously was their play of slow bowling, which was calamitous, to say the least. But bear in mind, no Andrew Strauss and no Ian Morgan. Strauss averaged only 25.4 in that series. To be fair, he wasn't alone. But again, it was pretty obvious to everyone that Strauss's career as a Test player was pretty much done. And getting a young kid like Neil Compton, I'm not saying Compton or Samet Patel are going to be these wonderful series-defining players, but they could have big series. We just don't know. Whereas we probably did know with Strauss, and to a lesser degree Morgan. Trot and Cook actually did okay. In the Sri Lanka series, they averaged 52 and 48 respectively, and Matt Pryor averaged nearly 30 on tour. Again, that number is obviously lower than his career numbers, but again, it's perfectly presentable for a number 7 keeper. So there are some silver linings there if you're looking at the batting card. Certainly problems, and we'll get back to India's hopes with their slow bowling as we get along, but not as bad as possibly it's made out to be. Um, England generally haven't been as bad as it's been made out, I don't think. Um, there's this sort of perception they've really completely fallen apart. It's not true. They've had really 3 bad tests in the last 2 years. The Oval Test against South Africa, where they let them get 2 for 640 odd, and then obviously the ones with the bat in Dubai and then Australia several years ago. But that's our 23 tests. There've really been 3 tests from England that you've seen them go, look, they're just not playing at all well. They're still fundamentally a solid at least team. I think they're still probably the second best team in the world. India, conversely, let's talk about them for a moment. They've been awful. I mean, frankly, this is what I keep coming back to, and throughout this, I'll come back to it at the end. They're just a bad cricket team. I mean, they've been awful for most of the time in the last 2 years. 22 tests they've played, most of them outside Asia, but not all of the bad stuff has been outside Asia. Obviously, they've had 7 that have been effectively innings defeats, either innings or 300 plus runs. 2 home draws to New Zealand a couple of years ago, and Brendan McCullum went nuts on them. Brendan McCullum went nuts on this team, with Prayun Oha in the team. We'll talk about Oha in a second. 2 road draws to the West Indies and a home draw to the West Indies in a game they probably should have lost, or they could have lost very easily. 9 wickets. And again, Ashwin and Oha, which we'll talk about in a second, were prominent in that. So out of those 22 tests, they've had 12 really subpar performances where they've been a bad cricket team. Maybe in many cases, very, very bad cricket team. You play in New Zealand at home, you expect to dominate and not have draws. 2 out of 3 draws at home. The batting in particular, and I've talked about this in previous, looks abysmal. Tendulkar, there are 3 big names: Tendulkar, Sehwag, and Gambhir. Tendulkar is 39 and a half years old. He's played 190 Test matches. This is literally unprecedented. Never seen anyone play as much cricket as Tendulkar, and it's going to end at some point. It's just a fact of life, I'm afraid. And so we have to really look really closely at Tendulkar for signs that it's sort of steepling off rapidly. And there's some signs that it's 27.22 average in 2012. That's 5 matches. Last 7 innings, 3 of them against New Zealand, not exactly murderer's row. High score of 25 in those 7 innings with 5 unassisted OEW or bowled dismissals, and averaging 17.71 in those 7 innings. Now look, 7 innings is 7 innings, but again, we have to be sensitive with Tendulkar because it's likely to fall apart pretty quickly. Sehwag, 2 years, 22 innings in the last 2 years, averaging under 30, 28.91, scoring only 22.7% of his innings. Hasn't got a century in 2 years, like since November of 2010 was his last century. The numbers in India are better over that time. 46.63 average, but still only a 25% score percentage, and still obviously no centuries. And when you bear in mind that that's against the West Indies and New Zealand, again, it's a danger sign. Gautam Gambhir, he's done as a Test player. I see no way he's coming back. He's had essentially 2 good years in his entire career since February of 2010. So we're looking now at 2.5 years, long time. 26.22, 21.1% score percentage. Hasn't scored a century in 38 innings. So combined, the Indian openers have no centuries in their last 68 innings. That's 17 full Test matches, and it's actually probably more than that, but 17 full Test matches if they batted twice every time. So, looking at that now, I think Kohli is a superb player. I think he's a nuclear bomb waiting to go off in the middle of that batting cut. It's true, although we haven't seen that. And so when you're comparing the middle orders, we haven't seen Kohli do an 80 average series. It could be this series. It really could be. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But when you look at the support around him, you've got those 3 guys. Yes, they played Pujara against New Zealand, got a century, but they didn't play more of the young kids, as I was advocating in my previous video on them. They didn't play Rahane. They didn't play Tawari. They didn't play Rohit Sharma, and they kept this sort of Suresh Raina thing going on. He's averaging 43 in first-class cricket. He's played 20 odd Test matches, averaging 30 or so, and they're probably going to pick him again. And it's a stupid selection. It's time to move on. We'll see if they do. If they go back to Yuvraj Singh, I'm just out. You need to pick guys that could be good. Yuvraj has proven that that's pretty much not going to happen. The middle order, again, very generously might be even, but you look at the other matchups. Opening batting is clearly with England. We talked about Alistair Cook's probably the best batsman in the world, or very close to it. We talked about the problems of the Indian openers. The batting depth is obviously England, even though that has eroded somewhat recently. It's still with England. Pace bowling is obviously with England. Slow bowling might be even, again, very generously so. And then other intangibles like out cricket and leadership obviously go with England. Leadership with the Indian team has been very contentious. Fielding is not ever going to be their strong suit. So look at that, and you go, okay, well, how can India possibly win? And I think actually if you wanted to believe that India could win, There are some silver linings there. The slow bowling problems are real, I think, for England. I think that they do have problems, and obviously particularly in Asia. So you look at who's in the front for slow bowling with India, and it's pretty much almost certainly going to be Prajan Oha, as I talked about earlier, and Ravi Ashwin. Two young, relatively young players who haven't really done a huge amount of Test level, obviously. I looked at their first class numbers and compared them to the first class numbers of the slow bowlers that did so much damage to England. Ashwin 4.4 wickets a match at 27.72 in first class cricket, and Oha very similar 4.4 at 27.15. That compares pretty favourably when you look at Herat and Abdurrahman and Ajmal. Herat 3.7 wickets a match at 25.03, Abdurrahman 3.7 wickets a match at 25.79, Syed Ajmal 3.8 wickets a match, which is surprisingly low in first class cricket, at 26.71. So on paper, and considering that the Indian Ranji Trophy is a much stronger batting circuit, those are promising. If you are looking for an Indian hope, it's going to have to be those two guys against to run through this England batting card. And furthermore, Ashton was dominant in the New Zealand Tests, 9 wickets a match at 13.11, amazing numbers. But you look at the only other team he's really played with a similar quality batting card, in fact a far worse batting card, is Australia. And it's not close actually, England's is much stronger. Against Australia, 3 wickets a match at 62.77. Again, outside Asia, but still, we don't have a lot of evidence to go on with these guys. Oha has been great against West Indies, Bangladesh, and New Zealand. 5.4 wickets a match at 25.82, outstanding, but against the bottom runs. Against other teams, he's 3.7 wickets a match at nearly 44. He's never played outside Asia, which is fine because obviously it's an Asia series, but it's just those career numbers of 4.7 wickets a match at 31.82. It's probably a high watermark for Prajan Oha. You're essentially asking these guys to do something they've never done before for India to win this series. Um, and it's pretty much their only hope. I mean, all the eggs are in this slow bowling basket. If that doesn't come off, you're essentially left with no hope. I really think that's the case. And not only do they have to do it, they have to do it over 4 Test matches. So they can't just do it once or twice and get lucky. England's superior depth, not only in their batting, but just they've got more good players, is likely to just tell over those 4 Test matches. So this sort of informs my pick in terms of England going 2-1. I think, again, you can make that case when it comes to India slow bowling, but look at all the other things. The fact that England's still a fundamentally good team and India's still a fundamentally bad one. I mean, that when you when you're trying to evaluate these series and you're predicting and you're trying to weigh up the various things, you keep coming back to that. And yeah, look, they weren't great in Asia. They weren't terrible in Asia. They really weren't. They were terrible for one Test match. The others were very tight. And honestly, the Sri Lankan batting card, for instance, is far superior to India's. I know that's unusual, but it's true. Kumar Sangakkara, Jayawadena, Dilshan, even Matthews, Samuel Wera, these are solid players you can rely on. Who can you rely on in India? They haven't scored centuries in 2 years, their openers. Tendulkar is nearly 40 years old, and you have a couple of kids that haven't played Test cricket for more than a year, if that. Um, Kohli is the key for their batting card, but even if he comes off, um, they're maybe going to get 300 consistently, but I think England can probably match that. Can Oha and Ashwin come through in a major way and dominate a series against a good team? And it is a good team. I don't think so. And I think again, if you're looking at this series, you have to come back to that fundamentally good team versus fundamentally bad team. Um, so with that in mind, I'm going to go England 2-1. We'll see how it all plays out. Yeah, look, especially for a 4 Test series, superior depth, I think will carry the day. Thanks for watching, guys. All the best. Thank you.